So there is a scene in Boyhood that I especially loved, where Eller's character, Mason Jr., Eller Coltrane's character, maybe he's 11 or 12 or so, and he's in the car with Samantha, his sister, who I believe is played by your daughter.
Yes.
Which maybe we can talk about, but and then his father, Mason Sr., played by Ethan Hawke, and his parents are divorced. They don't see their dad that often, and he's asking them about their lives, and they're giving them the kind of typical adolescent response.
The shoulder shrug
Yeah.
kind of response, like, yeah, it's all fine.
Talk to me. Samantha, how was your week? I don't know, Dad, it was kind of tough. Billy and Ellen broke up, and Ellen's kind of mad at me because she saw me talking to Billy in the cafeteria. And you remember that sculpture I was working on? Well, it was a unicorn, and the horn broke off, so now it's a zebra, okay? But I still think I'm gonna get an A, right? Mason, how was your week? Well, Dad, you know, it's kind of tough. Joe, he's kind of a jerk. Actually, he stole some cigarettes from his mom. He wanted me to smoke them, but I said no, because I knew what a hard time you had quitting smoking, Dad. How about that? Is that so hard?
Dad, these questions are kind of hard to answer.
What is so hard to answer? About what sculpture are you making?
It's abstract.
Okay, that's good. See, I didn't know that. I didn't know you were even interested in abstract art.
I'm not. They make us do it.
But Dad, I mean, why is it all on us though? You know, what about you? How was your week? You know, who do you hang out with? Do you have a girlfriend? What have you been up to?
I see your point. So we should just let it happen more naturally, right? That's what you're saying. Okay, that's what we'll do. Starting now.
So I love that scene for a couple of reasons, which I'll explain in a second. But first, I'm just curious where that scene came from, if you remember where the idea came from and how it developed.
Well, I mean, I was interested in showing a father who, well, Ethan and I both, just a guy who's kind of figuring out this fatherhood thing. Like, I got to talk to my kids, and he wants to communicate, he wants to have this thing, but he's trying a little too hard.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so
because he says...
He's not getting direct answers, but he's thinking they're blowing him off.
Right.
And not really communicating with him, but he demands that kind of relationship.
Right.
He wants actual conversation.
Right, so he says, we're going to have actual conversation, and they throw it back at him and say...
At the end...
Yeah, wait, you're not telling us
what
about
your
you?
Lives.
Right.
You know, what do you do for a living? Well, he's kind of this mysterious guy who floats into their life every other weekend or whatever and takes them to do stuff.
But I loved it not only because I could connect with, you know, what he's doing and also what the kids are doing, but also it highlighted for me one of the things I love about pretty much all of your movies, which is how much they do depict conversation. How you do have this interest, I think, in showing natural, real conversation happening between characters. So I'm curious, when you're writing and filming a scene like that, is that in the back of your mind somewhere? Do you think that this is also kind of about what I'm doing as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, I want it to seem like natural and real conversations. In fact, that's highly scripted and rehearsed and probably a little self-conscious. You know, real conversations, if you record them, are much more casual and they're kind of agreeing and digressive. And, you know, it's a challenge to make a scene that feels real, but that's actually pretty dramatic. He pulls the car over. He goes on these elaborate little mini monologues about what the conversation could be if they would just open their mouths. He's imagining, you know, so it's a kind of a big performance for Ethan, and then they throw it back at him. There's a lot going on in that scene. So it's not really realistic, but I want it to play.
Realistic.
Yeah. It's a construct. The movie, it's all a construct, but I want it to be accepted as realistic, but it's really just all the thoughts I had at that moment of, you know, being a parent and really getting to know this dad in your life that's been out of your life for a little while, and now he's back in. And
so when you're making that scene, you're thinking of your own experience as a parent and less, you know,
as a kid, yeah.
Right. But how do you pull that off? Because I think some people are surprised sometimes to find out that, I think this is true of pretty much all your movies as far as I know, that they are scripted, that they are heavily scripted, that it's not, sometimes those conversations feel improvisatory.
I just say, show me the films that aren't scripted, let's look at those films, and if they feel the same as there's no way to do it. I've been asked for 23 years, people have asked me, oh, is it improv? I'm like, no, I don't know how to do that. Can you do that? You know, get the two most, you know, articulate, interesting people you know, just turn on a camera, see what happens. It's not cinema.
And what do you think is it that you do? Because there are very few, in my opinion, very few filmmakers that achieve that effect. as well as you do, where in this movie and the before movies, in Dazed and Confused and so on, where you have these conversations that feel natural and real. And I mean, how do you get to that point? What do you think is the key, if there is one?
I think if I have any methodology behind it, it's probably a workshopping rehearsal period. A lot of movies, they don't really rehearse too much. They just work through it on the set. Well, that's way too late for me. That's like showing up for the game without having practiced. You know, I'm interested as a director, not just the actors, but I'm interested in the new ideas I'm going to have. As I hear these two people start talking, I'm going to hear other things, and maybe there's a rhythm there, maybe there's a new joke, maybe there's, you know, it's a very process-oriented. So to me, that script isn't done until we're shooting. That's the final 1%.
Right.
And then even then, there might be a new little idea, but we're to the final bit by the time we're shooting. Usually many hours and sometimes years have gone into that scene. Sometimes we worked it up the night before. Not a long monologue, but a shorter scene could be worked up rather quickly.
Goodbye, yard. Goodbye, crepe myrtle. Goodbye, mailbox. Goodbye, box of stuff Mommy won't let us take with us, but we don't want to throw away. Goodbye, house. I'll never like Mommy as much for making us move.
Samantha, why don't you say goodbye to that little horseshit attitude, okay? Because we're not taking that in the car.
Goodbye, old lady. Listens to rock music and rides a motorcycle.
There's scenes in this movie that I knew were coming 10 years in advance.
Right.
So I always say the last shot in the movie, I knew exactly what it was and what its context was and everything that would come before it 10 years before I shot it. But I didn't have the exact dialogue till about 10 hours before. So that's the macro and the micro.
Right.
And it explains a lot. But that's kind of, you know, I'm trying to dial it in on the reality of that moment and to be true to everything that came before it. In this film, because I had 12 years, I had all this time to really think about that, to gestate it. Most films, it's a luxury that films just don't give you.
Right.
I have a lot of filmmaker friends who are like, I'd love to just, can I film and then take a week off and just think and see the footage and feel my way? It's like, no, you can't. You got to do all your thinking up front. You have a script, and then you're shooting it, you're manufacturing the product, and you're doing the best you can. You're hanging on for dear life, and then, you know, you're kind of maybe jiggering it a little in post, and then that's the 3 steps.
Right.
So this was, I didn't have that. I could shoot and then edit, attach that to this ever-growing thing, and then spend a year thinking, watch the whole thing, edit the whole film again, watch it again by myself late at night, think about what this movie needs. I could just feel my way through it. It was an incredible way to work.
Right.
I'm now really indulged. I kind of want to make every film like this, you know.
Yeah. So do you edit every year, basically?
Mm-hmm.
And so even the earlier scenes, they would change what you were using. You might go back and think, oh, there was a different shot, or there was a different.
I changed a little bit. I mean, edit each year and just edit it like it's a final film. That didn't mean I couldn't go back. You know, 10 years later, I was going back and still working on the first scene or the first part of the movie.
But mostly fiddling at that point with
yeah,
the
that
stuff.
fine-tuning. And it was a different relation with my editor, too. She got to kind of participate a little bit in the storytelling side, which, you know, she does only in the editing. I've been working with Sandra Adair, my editor, for, 22 years now. And this was a different thing. We could sit there and talk about it. It's like, God, what is it? Is this part working? This part?
Well, see, as a fan, I would like to think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, you can disabuse me of this notion, but when hearing you talk about your process, it sounds itself conversational in a way.
Very.
That you're bringing people in to, and that must inform your approach to the scenes that you actually film.
My ideal working environment is a lot of talk and a lot of conversation, answering all questions. Some people, it's a personality thing. Because like I said, it's not just for the actors and for the script, it's for the ideas I'm going to have. I'm trying to trigger new ideas in myself of what will make the scene really go to a new level or work. So I really demand that time. And I even like to get the actors on location before we're filming and kind of, block it and think about it. It just informs how I want to shoot the scene. And I just can't stress the prep element.
Right.
That's so... It's always been really important to me, and I think that's where a lot of the humor comes from too. You get people in a room talking. I mean, Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, and I, we sit in these rooms for weeks, months, and for the Before trilogy, and that's where that film lives. When I think of the creative process, we're in a room together.
It's striking what you told me about the last, having come up with that last scene so early, because I had also sort of assumed, I guess, you know, that, okay, and I think this is true, that you're drawing not only on your experience, on the experiences of Ethan Hawke and Patricia Arquette, who play the parents who are informing the story. You mentioned your editor, and also Eller Coltrane. I kind of have just assumed, and maybe wrongly, that to some extent the person that he becomes in the movie, I mean, was that shaped at all by the person he became in real life? I mean, you didn't know when he was 6 or 7.
I think so. I always told him, you know, like, this film is going to merge with you at some point in the future. Because I was kind of sitting on both kids, Lorelei and Eller. You know, they would have ideas. I said, well, this character isn't you. You know, this is, you're not really normal. Neither of them was like a normal kid in different ways. I'm like, you know, you need to dress this way, and here's what we're going to talk about. And, you know, they felt kind of constrained, dressed much more dorkily than they really would. And but eventually, their personalities kind of merge with these characters. They're fictional characters. So it was a fascinating process to see them kind of come into their own, you know, artistically, and see their own development as actors and collaborators. You know, when we first started, Eller wasn't even really reading. You know, it was just like talk about the scenes, give him lines, and pretty soon, you know, by the end, he's writing, and he's a full-blown collaborator, you know, all the way. I think the film built a momentum based around that, how much he started to contribute, how much he kind of, his own personality asserted itself. And that's kind of your own development, though. As you're a kid, you're kind of, especially if you're the youngest in a family, you're just being buffeted around by the forces much older and greater than you. But, you know, pretty soon you start kind of carving out your own territory.
Right.
By the end, you know, he's got a job, he's driving his own truck, he's going off on a road trip, you know.
Right, complaining about Facebook.
Yeah, all that.
In this movie, the span of his life becomes the frame in a way that, even though we see actors on TV age, they age with us as we do, but you're not sitting down for 2.5 hours and watching it all happen at once. No,
I bet the whole farm on the cumulative effect of all these little intimate moments, plus that time and the way they're maturing and aging, would add up to something special. That was just the whole feel of the movie. It didn't need a lot of plot or, you know, extra dramatization. That itself would be a pretty dynamic, dramatic sweep, just to see everyone aging so quickly but so leisurely too. You know, it's like you feel like you've lived those 12 years, hopefully.
Yeah.
That was the idea anyway.
And in some ways, this in my mind, goes back to this question of conversation. I don't think there's any other medium that allows you to depict, you know, conversation that feels like the conversations we have in real life, the way the film does. You know, in books you can't show people talking over each other, really, because one line follows another.
No overlaps.
On stage you have to be stagey in a sense. I mean, you can't speak quietly or mumble or talk over each other quite the same degree. Are those the kinds of things you think about as a filmmaker? Like, this is something I can do in movies that you couldn't do anything else?
I do think a lot about cinematic storytelling versus all the other art forms. And there's a certain constriction to that, like I was explaining the youth of the character. You can't, you know, you're stuck with, you know, that moment. You know, you can't have a 12-year-old that suddenly depict a 17-year-old. You know, you're limited. That said, I've always felt like the cinematic storytelling landscape was the Wild West. I always came into it with early ideas like, why couldn't you tell it? Would that work? Yeah, that could work. You know, I always felt film was, I still do. Right. You know, like there's all these possibilities for storytelling. That, I mean, the history lesson 101 kind of goes, well, film was really coming into its own in the silent era. They were really figuring out this medium and storytelling. And just as it was getting interesting, boom, sound comes in and kind of limits it. You know, the tyranny of the 19th century 3-act structure, you know, precedent was kind of invaded film and set it back years. I mean, I've heard that this is a theory going around for years and years. So, but there's something to it. There's something to it. I don't know if there's still a lot of storytelling potential in film.
Yeah, I mean, that's the striking thing, to think that the medium has been around for 100 years, and yet there's still something new. I mean,
well, we're still the youngest medium, you know, in a way. So I've always felt, you know, that there was a lot of possibilities with time. And I think you have to just realize, I mean, I sit in these meetings with sometimes, you know, well-meaning, intelligent studio executives, and they're like, or just anybody, they're oh, well, we need this so the audience will think that. And it's like, well, you know, you're almost not even understanding the power of the medium you're working in. You don't need all that. People, this strong identification comes from just sitting in your seat and watching. Like on this movie, you didn't need to, oh, why should we care about this person? That's the, what are the stakes? Why should we, oh, we need to, so they trump up some plot thing. Oh, you know, his dog died, so, you know, or whatever it is. He lost a parent. You know, that's every Disney film. Oh, let's lose the parents, and then we'll now care about the kids because they've suffered. And it's like, most people don't lose their parents. You know, you've just lost the audience. I mean, yes, you do care about them. It's a cheap trick, and that they've been using forever.
Well, and it seems like with this movie, you actually maybe moved into that direction. So you mentioned that both your own daughter and Eller, you know, were sort of unusual kids, and you were asking them to be a little more normal.
Yeah, there was nothing extraordinary about these people. That was one of our titles, like Ordinary People. would have worked fine. Right. You know, I didn't want them to be, you know, I feel that way about so much of life and storytelling. You know, once you tell me, even in religion, you know, and oh, well, these saints, they saw visions and had miracles. Well, that leaves me out because I don't have visions and miracles don't happen. And you know, so where is that? You know, I like things that feel common to everyone. You know, that's truth to me. It's not fiction. It's not this hyped up, you know, crap that people have to throw in there to make them more interesting. You know, like St. Francis is fascinating enough without having to think that these, you know, this crazy miracles happened around him. You know?
Right. Well, and as a lover of movies, it's exciting to think that you've managed to continue making these kinds of movies, you know, despite whatever studio executives might say. You know, you found your own way to go off and do the movies you want to do. And does that seem, I mean, it seems immensely encouraging. Do you feel optimistic about?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of take an optimistic approach in general. I mean, it's tough. It's a tough road to hoe sometimes. You know, you got to work with low budgets, and you know, the beauty is just getting to do it. Like this movie, 12 years, you know, no one got paid. It was just this, I mean, it's not even labor of love. It's just something else. Right. This movie was, you know, so you're making the sacrifices in your life and doing what you have to do, but you're just blessed that you get a chance to do it. So that's kind of where we were all coming from all along. And I've kind of figured that out early on. You don't get everything you want, but if you know, you get, you know, what I ever wanted was just the opportunity to try to tell these stories. And so that's pretty good. I have to remind myself of that constantly.
Yeah, well, and it comes across, because I think, if nothing else, and I think there's much more to the movie besides, but as you sit there watching, there is something, it does feel special to be in that room watching this unfold. It feels like you're in the presence of something in an unusual way.
Yeah, everything about this film was unusual. It continues to be. Nothing surprises me at this point. We were so blessed, you know, everything we had, like if there were film gods, they were just kind of with us all along. You know, like Ethan has to catch a plane, we're in the bowling alley, Lorelai, it's written here, you roll a strike, go do it, 9-year-old, you know, bing, strike, okay, we can leave. And, you know, the guy hits the home run when the camera's right there. It's like, that was amazing. That was a poor hitting Astros team in that era, right. Let me tell you. They would go many games and never hit a home run. And just the inning we have the camera rolling, it didn't hit it off screen. It hit it right down the middle. Like you couldn't have take the best hitter in baseball and say, okay, groove a fastball, and I'm just try to pull it to left field. The best hitter in baseball can't necessarily do that. Right. It might be there for a long time.
That was one of the scenes that we came out of the movie talking about, just sort of marveling at the filmmaking part of it. Like, how did he do that?
How did that happen? It's just, I mean, you know, you set that up, you're like, okay, we're going to film this inning, and I hope someone, like, hits a grounder to third, let's say, or short. Let's just hope something happens. It was fun. We were often insinuating ourselves into the Harry Potter book signing. That was a real event, almost documentary style. We kind of insinuated ourselves into it and made it work for our story. That only happened a couple times. Right. That's one example. For the most part, it was all, you know.
Was Eller a fan of Harry Potter at that point?
My daughter certainly was. I'm not even sure if Eller had read them at that point. Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. Lorelei was a huge fan. That's where I was a fan. I'd read them to her. It was a neat, unique collaboration with the culture in that way. It was like, well, what? I wanted the whole film to seem like a memory, you know. So what would be remembered from this year? You know, we're shooting a period film in the present tense, so I'm thinking like, well, what would you remember from this year? You know, like what if you're looking back on your life from a future moment? I said, well, I think those book signings will be. I remember things from my childhood. You just kind of take for granted these Harry Potter book releases at midnight. I said, that didn't happen when I was a kid, and that may never happen again. That's something you would definitely remember. I didn't want to do too much of that, but just a little bit. The Obama election of '08. You know, then there's all the technology that sort of takes care of itself.
So you weren't making a special effort to like, oh, we've got to have a cell phone in this scene?
Not really. I just knew they were going to change.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't, it was like, there's a funny scene where the stepdad demands everyone's cell phones. And that's right, I think the iPhone had just been released. That's probably like '07 or it's just coming out, but you know, a kid wouldn't have one immediately.
Right.
But I remember it was right around then they were just, but you know, none of them had them yet. But pretty soon they all have them.
Yeah. You know, your characters often have these big conversations about big ideas, which is also unusual, I think, and something you don't get to see a lot on screen. And sometimes it seems as though it's the ideas themselves that you're exploring, a movie like Waking Life,
Yeah.
right? Other times, and I think of the before movies, it's really what's happening between the characters that maybe
True.
matters more than... I wonder if that's a distinction you think about, or if this is just not how you think about these scenes at all.
I don't really think that much. Each story is very different in what the spectrum of what it's trying to express or what it's able to within the confines or unlimitedness. I think in Waking Life, you know, what's going on between these people are, you know, every movie's different. You know, what it can contain or what's appropriate for it. But I do tend to have, I guess, these kind of talky characters who are trying to articulate and communicate, you know, because I think I'm doing that too. I really want to, you know, whether it's the rehearsal process, I'm trying to communicate, and I'm trying to communicate with an audience really in a simple way, sort of. You know, I want them to experience it in the way I am trying to communicate. And it feels great when that communication seems to happen, but you have to kind of work for that to communicate directly, you know, and within this, you know, storytelling medium. So it's always a challenge, but there's something kind of simple about it. You know.